Hello there, thrill seekers. What is ILess Abiding, and do you need it in your practice? We'll find out after 16 seconds of George Harrison style guitar. All right, hello there, thrill seekers. That was, of course, the intro to the Ringo Starr song It Don't Come Easy, as played by George Harrison, as played by me on the fake George Harrison guitar. So I got an email the other day, and I thought I would comment on it. So let's just dive right in, and I'm going to read you the email. The guy says, I woke up from a particularly beautiful and vivid dream and found that my sense of I, had gone offline. Thoughts were still occurring, but they were arising from nowhere and passing on into nowhere. It was a pretty interesting experience, but it didn't last into the morning. But is this the goal of practice, to always be in that state of ILess abiding, not eyeless? For you listening to the audio version, Brad is pointing to his eye. No, not eyeless as in without eyes, but I as in me-less. So is that the goal of practice, to always be in that state of eyeless abiding? Is that how you feel all the time? And it's an interesting question. It gives me a chance to basically kind of repeat something that I have said on this video channel many times before, and I hope those of you who watch regularly won't be too bored, because I think this is a lesson we all have to hear a lot. And I include myself in that group of people who have to hear this lesson a lot, which is there is no goal. There is no goal to Zen practice. This is one of the hardest things, I think, for people who practice Zen to really get their heads around. Or, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting. It's been the hardest thing, maybe one of the hardest things, for me to get my head around. Because I've been doing this for 40 odd years, and it still comes up where I'm like, oh, I'm not reaching my goal of Zen practice. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This is lousy Zen. This is good Zen. I remember having conversations with this guy who used to come to the Zen Center, who thankfully I don't see much anymore because he was annoying. But this guy, and I would say something off the cuff like, oh yeah, my Zazen today was pretty lousy. And he'd be like, my Zazen is great every single time. They'd be going, yeah, sure, right. I think for most of us, our Zazen isn't great every single time, or isn't what we judge to be great every single time. It's usually kind of hit or miss, and that's the way it's been for me for 40 odd years, hit or miss. There is a very instructive old Zen story, and I should have looked it up before I came here, or before I turned on the video camera. Because I can't cite chapter and verse and tell you where to find it, but it basically goes like this. There's a Zen monk who says to somebody who I guess is maybe a teacher or somebody who's kind of higher up than him, maybe, I'm not sure. And he says, if a cloudy mind comes, let it come. If a clear mind comes, let it come. And the teacher says something like, what if neither a cloudy mind nor a clear mind come? And the guy says something like, I hear there's a sale on socks at JCPenney's. Actually, the ending is, that's the bit I can't remember. The ending is something like they're selling prunes for 200 yen a piece at the market or something. I guess 200 yen a piece would be a little pricey for a prune. But anyway, he says something much more ancient and oriental than what I just said. But basically, he just kind of says, something about here's what's going on in the world. It doesn't matter. So what he's expressing is that it doesn't matter whether your Zazen feels like eyeless abiding or whether it feels like I'm just going on and on about my laundry today. Whatever it is. I don't know what you're going on and on. We're having trouble with our washing machine, with our dryer, actually. So that's why I thought of laundry. But, it's that kind of thing. Now, I do want to circle around to what this guy mentioned. He said, I woke up from a particularly beautiful and vivid dream and found that my sense of I had gone offline. Thoughts were still occurring, but they were arising from nowhere and passing on into nowhere. Now, I don't know if this guy has read Hardcore Zen, but I'm pretty sure that in Hardcore Zen, I wrote about my own experience of something like that. I can't remember because the book is all kind of a blur to me, but I know in at least the early drafts, I wrote about something that I'd actually written in a diary at the time, and then I kind of copied it out of my diary into the text of the book. But it was almost word for word what he just described. It was waking up in the morning and there was no sense of I anymore. There was just it was strange. It was beautiful. There was no sense of ownership of any of the thoughts. Thoughts would kind of come and then they'd kind of drop off and they'd just go. And I was very excited, and of course so excited that I wrote it down in a little journal and then copied it off into a book. But I realized after a while that those kind of things tend to come and go. I also remember something that I'm pretty sure I did not put in Hardcore Zen, which is, I remember, I don't know if I know it was a time in my life when I'd been going to a lot of retreats and things and been studying very intensely with Nishijima Roshi. And I was walking home from work. Tsuburaya Productions, where I worked in Tokyo, I say it's in Tokyo, and technically, well, now it's moved, but anyway, technically it was in Tokyo. But anybody who knows Tokyo will know when I say it was in the Setagaya ward that's not what you think of as Tokyo. Usually when you think of Tokyo, you think of Shibuya and Shinjuku with all the bright lights and things going off and cars and traffic and everything. Setagaya is like the edge of Tokyo, and it's very residential and quiet and stuff. And it was about 15 or 20 minute walk from the office to the train station. And I was making that walk going home one day, and it occurred to me that I had not been thinking. It was just weird. I'd been walking for, let's say, 10 minutes or something, and I just realized I hadn't thought a single thought in that 10 minutes. And I was used to, most of my life, having just thought after thought after thought after thought after thought after thought, and kind of imagining that that's just the way it goes. It just, thought just keeps going and churning and churning and churning and churning and churning. And then, like I said, I was walking and I realized I hadn't had a thought for 10 minutes. And even that thought that I haven't had a thought for 10 minutes, just kind of went up, hello there, and then whoop, back down into the no more thoughts. And that was when I noticed something that I've put this in books a lot and things. But what I noticed is that steady stream of thought that we all, well, maybe I'm projecting again, maybe, but that I thought was just my lot in life, that this is just how it goes, that I just think or thought and thought and thought and thought and thought and thought, morning till night, from the time I wake up till the time I go to sleep, and probably even in my sleep. That is actually a habit. And most of us don't realize it's a habit because the habit is so deeply ingrained. But what's going on, if you start to notice it, this is what I noticed, and here you go. What's really going on is that thought will quiet down. And what most of us do, what I saw myself doing after I finally got on to noticing how it worked, was that we kind of poke it. This is always the gesture I do. But I imagine a pink brain, out there in the void somewhere, and somebody's going, come on, think of something. And we just keep thinking of things because I don't know why, but it's just kind of a habitual thing to just keep going, poke, think of something. The other image I've used, and long-time viewers will recognize this one, is I sort of imagined it like you're in a room with a bunch of bicycles that are turned sort of upside down so they're wheels up, right? This is just the image I thought of. And you move that, you get one of the wheels moving and going, and then you notice over here, that wheel's slowing down, so you go walk over there and spin that one. You go, wait a minute, that one over there is slowing down a little bit too, so I spin that one. And you're just continuously going around the room, spinning these wheels and making them go. And it's such a habit that you don't realize that you're doing it all the time. And what is I was going to say necessary. I don't know if it's necessary. But if you want to stop that, the thing to do is to learn. It's not to learn to suppress the thoughts. This is what I thought it was at the beginning, and what I wasted a lot of energy on in my early Zazen practice was trying to push the thoughts down and, clamp them, like put a clamp on my thoughts so that they wouldn't continue anymore, conceptually, obviously. But what is really needed, if you want to do that, is just to learn not to keep poking at your brain, or not to keep turning those wheels, because if you stop doing that, it'll just settle down on its own. Now, having said that, when the guy talks about ILess abiding, sometimes you go for a while. I'm projecting again, this is me. Sometimes I go for a while and it's pretty clear up there. There's not a lot of thought going on, or there's just, a couple of random things going on, but it's not like crowding out and being noisy or anything. And then some days, other things happen. For example, you go to the hospital for 5 days and there's a lot of tests and weird stuff going on. And that stimulates your brain and you're going, and that lasts for a while. But eventually, if you don't keep poking at it, even that calms down. Now, the other thing I wanted to kind of address in this question was this concept of ILess abiding. Again, not I like Brad is pointing to his eye. Sorry, I'm doing that for the people listening to the audio version. Not like no eyes, but the ILess abiding with no eyes, or abiding with no eye, not no eyes. It's, I wonder where the guy who wrote to me got that from. It sounds like the kind of thing you'd find on an internet forum about Buddhism or meditation or something. It's nothing. It's not a phrase I've ever come across in I've read zillions. Well, you can't. My books about Buddhism are all up there. My books about geeky monster and rock and roll stuff are at the bottom here. But I've read a bunch of books about Buddhism, and I've gone through it for a while. And this is the first time I ever came across that particular term. So I think one of the things you kind of gotta watch out for in this day and age is that there's a lot of people out there, especially on the internet, who have it, they want to seem like they know stuff about meditation, and they'll put together these words and things that they've kind of cobbled together from whatever sources they get them, and then they start throwing them around, and then people go, oh, that's the goal of practice. But if you're going to do Zen, the goal is no goal. Now, again, having said that, I don't know if I have to say again. Anyway, having said that, having no goal is there's a kind of a thing people do. They will say, well, if your goal is to have no goal, then that's a goal too. Yeah, sure, semantically that's true, but the actual experience or practice of having no goal is quite different from having a goal. And for me, what that means is I'm sitting Zazen, and what I learned from Nishijima Roshi is that I am mostly paying attention to my posture. His idea was that we have two halves of the sympathetic nerve, or two halves of the autonomic nervous system. One is the sympathetic, one is the parasympathetic. And basically the sympathetic nervous system is the one that makes you think a lot and be very sharp and be very on point, and you're very intellectual, that kind of thing. And the parasympathetic nervous system is the, I guess, rest and relax, or I forget, there's rest and digest, I think is sometimes what they call it, where you're just kind of like spacing out and being like, whoa, whatever, man. And when you're doing Zazen, what you want is not to fall into either of those camps. So when I'm doing Zazen, what I find is that I kind of go back and forth between the two, just continuously as I'm sitting. So, and I'll notice it. I'll notice that I'm thinking a lot and getting very sharp, and I go, no. And what always happens consistently, ever since I learned this from Nishijima Roshi, is that if I'm going one way into the sympathetic nervous system getting too sharp, or going the other way in the parasympathetic nervous system getting too relaxed and dull, the posture is always 100% of the time for 40 some years is always going wrong. So the posture follows what your brain is doing. And so I found that the most useful thing is to just watch the posture. So I am sitting and I am trying to hold on to this posture, but not rigidly. And when I notice that it needs adjusting, I make the necessary adjustments and carry on. I try not to get too judgmental about my zazen, because this is the whole thing about goalless practice, is that, whatever goal you put in mind, let's say ILess Abiding, that sounds great. Actually, to me, no fooling, no kidding. It sounds great. I would love to be in a state of ILess Abiding all the time, as this guy who wrote me thinks I might be. But I'm not. And so, whatever ILess Abiding is, though, it's an image I've created in my mind. Ultimately, it has to be. So I think, what should ILess Abiding feel like? And I go, well, maybe it feels like I don't think of myself, or I feel like thoughts are coming and going without a thinker, and it's just rising up out of the void and crashing back into the void, or whatever. You create a bunch of images, and then when you're doing your zazen, you're comparing what's really happening in your actual zazen practice to what you want to happen, that image you've created. But that image that you created of what you want to happen in your zazen is coming from exactly the same effed up place as any other thought. It's just your ego thinking what it needs to enhance itself. It isn't really anything. So the best thing to do is just be like that monk. If a clear mind comes, let it come. If a cloudy mind comes, let it come. And just let everything go, including your judgments about whether you're in the ILess Abiding, or whatever you want to call the perfect state that you think you should be in during meditation. Whether you're in that or not, and judging it doesn't matter. Just what I find most useful is just to go back to sitting, just to go back and continue doing my zazen, and just accepting that some days are going to feel real good and some days probably aren't. I think in my own practice, every once in a while I get one of those times where I'm like, wow, this is how zazen is supposed to feel, and it's wonderful. Every once in a while. But most of the time, it's just sitting. I just sit just to sit, and it feels good for the most part, but it doesn't, I don't get into some mystical state or some wonderful ILess Abiding. I don't know if there are people who do that. When I read Nisargadatta Maharaj, author of I Am That, I feel like, well, he seems to be maybe a guy who found a way to be almost always in that kind of state, and good for him. But I think most of us just don't, and that's not a problem. That it's not a problem if you're not in that beautiful state of no me. There's another thing. God, I wish I could remember exactly the quote, but let me see what I can do with it. Ramesh Balsekar, who was a student of Nisargadatta Maharaj, this is Advaita tradition and not Zen tradition. He pointed out in one of his talks that in English we make a big distinction between I and me. But in most other languages, the distinction between I and me is not there. So I tends to be more sort of this conceptual, whatever it is. That's the way I think of it. And me, I tend to be more personalized about. But really, the question to ask yourself is, who is this me that I'm always worried about? That's what Balsekar says, something like that. I found that useful, and I wish I could remember exactly what I said, because it probably would have been better if I used his actual words. And one last thing. When he said ILess Abiding, just remembered this book. This is the best of science fiction TV. They used to have this on the, I think it was the third floor of the Akron Public Library, and I used to know exactly where to find it every time. And the reason I loved it was because of this picture that appears. Those of you who are listening on the audio version won't be able to see this, but it's a picture from a TV show called Johnny Sacco's Flying Robot. And the monster that the flying robot, who's like 100 feet tall, is facing off is a giant floating eyeball. It was called Opticon in the English version, and Ganmons in the Japanese version. And Ganmons is sort of like Gan is a way of saying I. It's kind of a more technical medical way of saying I, and mons is short for monster. So anyway, that's the, I want the kind of ILess Abiding where I can defeat the giant floating eyeball just like the robot from Johnny Sacco's Flying Robot. So sorry, had to geek out on. It took me a long time to find my own copy of this book because it turns out to be a British book. I don't know why it was in how it got to the Akron Public Library, but it took me forever to find this, but I finally found it a few years ago, and here it is. Okay, that's it. That's all I want to say. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to donate to me saying more things like this, you can go to the URL that you're about to see on the screen below, or that you are about to hear if you are listening on the audio version, and that is hardcorezen.info/donate. hardcorezen.info/donate. That's where you can find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually my only ways of making a living, and I appreciate your support. But as always, you don't got to support me if you don't want to. All right, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye.
There is an action shot of Ziggy. Not really. Usually when I'm making these videos, he's just sleeping. And you can see my wife's Wham album. That is not mine. Behind Ziggy. All right, Ziggy, I'm just going to let you sleep. Thanks for doing a cameo. Bye.